record on this computer. And let's get started because everyone knows, I believe, that Monday we are going to do sort of a review of all these 8 practices. And amazingly, every single person who I asked was able to be available. One person I think is pulling out because she just doesn't, after seeing the shift to focus, the focus that we're having, she's a little nervous that she's not expert enough, which kills me because it's Peg Smith. And I'm like, yeah, Peg, you're expert.
That's great news.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So I'll need those list of names to add somewhere.
I'll send those to you.
Yeah, but I love that. Thank you.
Yes, and the way we're thinking, what we really want to do is to think about these practices in the context of today's world, of the sort of COVID world. We're teaching online or teaching in persons at a distance. And how do you do these things? And the way we're going to do it is for our team to ask the experts the questions, or me. So it's sort of like it's a fireside series, sort of, and Pao and Alex and Kelly and Fatima are going to be in the audience and asking the questions of the group. They'll start off. And David, I'd love for you to join us if you're interested too. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end. But that's what we're going to do. So we'll get started with that. So today is a really interesting topic to me because, so many ways, this is what math teaching is all about. It's starting to understand what kids are thinking. And as I read this, I thought, well, in some ways, teachers start off. This should be the very first thing, the very first best practice. Because if you don't know where your kids are thinking, where do you go? But then again, there are a whole bunch of others. So where does this fit together with all the other best practices for you? And then we're going to define it after we do this, Kim, just to let you know, because I know that was a really good question you asked. How does this fit into the best practices for you guys? So there are only 3 of you guys, 4 of you guys talking, where David could too.
Okay, I'll jump in.
Okay, please do.
Yeah. Again, me when I was reading this in Spanish and going back to the English version, I thought, why is not this chapter titled evaluation? Because when we talk about an evaluation, we usually think, or but teachers usually think in evaluation as that at the end of something, but we actually know that evaluation has to be all around it. So what you are talking about is about diagnostic evaluation. It will be, how can I know where to start? And then everything is about formative evaluation, and it has to be all around the class, in the whole process of teaching, and also when we talk about summative evaluation. So I think it has to be all around. So we have to choose a place where we have to put it, but then must be all around.
Right. So you read this really as an evaluation. This is really talking about what evaluation really looks like. Yeah. Kim or Linda, why the distinction? Why did they call this eliciting evidence of student thinking rather than evaluating student thinking or student evaluations? Why was there that distinction, do you think?
Linda, I'll let you start, since you are the headmistress of this document.
I was not the expert that wrote it.
But you know, still the headmistress.
I just chose the right people to do the writing.
Yeah, and there may not be an answer. These are tough questions.
To me, assessment or evaluation always seems to be an end product of after you've taught something, then you assess or evaluate. And I actually think the way this is worded, it's more about, to go back to your original question, Chad, kind of having an idea of whether the kids have the prerequisite knowledge, which would be the first step. But then also, this doesn't wait until the end. You're constantly looking for evidence of student thinking and understanding. And so when we talked the other day, I said, as a teacher, I wanted to have a better idea of where kids were, and not just base it on a test, or if I knew they weren't ready, no matter what the pacing guide said, it wasn't time for a test if they didn't understand. So I see this as being more ingrained in daily teaching than waiting until the end for a quiz or some kind of assessment.
I have a similar view, Linda, that I see it as more continuous, this gathering. But the word elicit is interesting. And since we talked about words, the exact words when we talked about productive struggle, so the word elicit it's different than gather, and it's different than assess. It's really intentionally going out and getting something you need. So you put something out there so that you could gather the data that you need to go forward. And so that's an interesting choice of words. The thing that the way I visualize this particular practice is that you are gathering this information, and it may be less about each student, but it may be more about the global view of what's happening in the classroom so that you can plan instruction. So if you're being responsive to what you see in front of you in the classroom, and it may have less to do with individual students, which is important, obviously. That's, nobody's arguing that. But if you think about it from a letting that guide you rather than maybe your book, your textbook, or your curriculum even.
So you're really saying elicit the thinking of the class as a whole in addition to individuals.
Yeah, I think there's patterns and trends and connections that you can make, because once you have that evidence, if someone's thinking of it this way, someone's thinking of that way, when you bring them together, you might have a greater than the sum of those two parts to work with.
Yeah, along those lines, I read an article recently of a teacher who proposes that occasionally she gives whole class grades for a test. And instead of, so Callie can get 100, but if I got a 50, we'd average them and the class would get a 75. And the idea is, as a whole, you all need to understand this. What do you guys think about that idea? What do you think?
It depends on the task.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, tell me about that.
Well, it's very interesting when you develop a small project, and of course you can have different views that contribute to the whole. So if a particular group does not, let's see, give the view that group C is given, however, they contributed to the whole view. So you have to be careful how you develop those little tasks and little projects, and that's very interesting.
Yeah.
We're talking about outliers.
Yeah.
What happened with outliers?
What happens with outliers? Well, there's a whole conversation there, isn't there?
Yeah.
We talk
How
to
to
them
treat them.
later.
I bet they understand outliers better. Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
I find that interesting because I'm even thinking about when I did some group projects and everybody had to contribute to the group. How some parents probably reacted more negatively than the kids did.
Yes.
So there's a shared responsibility there, which I think is important for kids to learn. But I think you also have to be careful because there are kids who genuinely struggle and you don't want to make them the scapegoat. So I find that very interesting, but I think it would have to be handled very carefully. Agreed.
But to David's point too, in the real world, when you use mathematics, it's often to complete a task. And if you're working as a group, you don't go, well, you guys do shopping and I'll do shopping and someone else do shopping, and whoever does it the best will use just their shopping. We all do it together. And so there was something to be said about that. One thing I used to do was I'd give my students a test, and if I'm lucky, there's no perfect score. And then I give them a blank test a day later with just their grade on it. And then I'd say, your job, every single person in this class has to turn in the perfect paper. And then they argue and debate as a class. And I don't know which ones I got right. I just know I got 90% of them right. And so there was a whole big debate, sort of similar along to those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about that in like, what can we build collectively rather than necessarily the average of how everybody's doing. What can we arrive at together? And it also, my first question was, well, what opportunities did they have to construct their learning together beforehand? Like if everybody is working independently and then that's my grading mechanism, that's really unfair. But if the whole, across the whole goal and the whole task has been, okay, what can we build together? Then it makes more sense to have grades be connected to that.
Great point. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about cooperative learning. So do you think you can really elicit student thinking if they're working individually on a task? I mean, can you get a deep understanding of what the student's thinking? Let's take a break for just a second. Kim, tell us what is like eliciting evidence of student thinking, so we have like a baseline.
Well, that's a really good question. To answer kind of sort of what you were talking about is, I worked with a teacher once in a school where we were coming up with, it was a big task. It wasn't a small one. It was a deep task. And what she did was she took everybody's responses and she put them up on the board. And what the kids had to do was to puzzle the pieces together, and they had to make connections between them. And together as a class, they collaboratively came up with what the class thought was. It was a rubric. So it was a rubric score of 4. And so what was evidence? Well, the evidence was a lot of things in that case. It could be, it could have been something verbal somebody said and somebody else wrote it down. So you have a shared agency there. It could be a picture. It could be a drawing. It could be a set of manipulatives. It can be an equation. It can be the calculation that comes at the end that actually finds an answer to go with. So there's a lot of ways that evidence could come forward, but that's just modalities. That doesn't even count as what is. I mean, it's a great question. Let's ask everybody, what is?
Yeah, what is evidence? Okay, yeah, let's put you guys all in the hot seat.
Well, I'm sorry, when Callie was talking and you now, Kim, it reminded me one example. Actually, I had a great experience. I presented a proof of a geometric fact. You know, it can be done at high school level. It was college level. It doesn't matter. Actually, it was very basic problem. But I presented to the students. And of course, I used different wordings and little things. And the task was the students had to grade. And so they were relaxed and they said, okay, let's grade the teacher. So I am going to put him a B. It doesn't matter. Some students, oh, come on, don't be mean. Give him an A. Okay, but you have to give me a feedback. And while they were writing the feedback, it was very interesting the way they understood my solution, the little flaws I created. And of course, you see the discussions. Oh, we can let him, how do you say, go by with this little mistake. It's not such a big deal. No, come on. He has to be a little bit more precise. It doesn't matter. I was just listening and writing and things like that. So it was very interesting because I could notice who understood the proof really well and who didn't. And they benefit from the discussion. You know, oh, yes, Fernando is right. I'm sorry, I didn't see. No. We should take some points out of the grade of this.
That's really interesting. That'd be fun to do. I bet students like that too.
Bro, they feel relaxed grading, you know?
Yeah.
They are much tougher than teachers, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, what do you guys think? In fact, I'm really interested to hear from you because you have been in the classroom pretty recently. What was evidence of student learning to you, and what did that mean? Same for others. What do you think, Alex?
I was just going to say, Fátima,
Okay, thank you.
o sea, solo Charles está preguntando si, ¿qué fue como el tipo de evidencia que tú veías en la clase cuando tú estabas dando clases como docente?
¿Evidencia o de los chicos, de cómo expresaban?
Ajá, como que evidencia de aprendizaje, o sea, ¿qué tipo de evidencia veías o buscabas tú en tu clase?
Esa es buena pregunta.
Ya. Gracias, Kim. Pues la que nosotros, bueno, o yo lograba observar todavía con ellos era más que todo lo hacíamos en la resolución de problemas. Cuando trabajábamos por medio de parejas. ¿Vas a traducir, Alex, o sigo?
Sí, so in resolving problems, like working in pairs. ¿Puedes seguir?
Sí, ok. Por lo general, siempre dentro de mi grado había más de 4 chicos o 5 que tenían adecuaciones curriculares o alguna otra necesidad.
So there were 4 or 5 students in her classes that would have learning. Honestly, I don't even know what the word would be. It's like like difficulties learning, like that need a little bit extra attention or extra support.
Yeah.
Entonces, cuando nosotros realizamos como nuestras actividades, siempre teníamos algo que en la mano o en el cuaderno se les pegaba una estampita que se indicaba que ese compañero podía apoyar al otro para resolver más de algún problema, ¿verdad? Porque ellos hasta cierto punto ya iban como un poquito más avanzados que algunos otros. Entonces, al momento de resolver nuestros problemas, ellos era como, bueno, se paraban y a buscar a su compañero con marca en la mano o con estampita en el cuaderno.
Okay, so then there were students, fueron los que, o sea, podrían apoyar que tenían la estampilla.
Sí, los que tenían la estampilla era como, les decíamos que eran como los maestros en chiquito.
Okay, so the students that were a little bit more advanced and maybe could like help a little bit more, they would have like a stamp that was in their notebook or on their hand or something where they were sort of like the little teachers or the support so that they could go and support other students that maybe needed some more additional help, and so those students would be sort of designated to fill that role.
So how did
ellos por lo general, sí, ¿sabes?
Yeah, how did you know if every student learned? How do you know? That's what we're looking for.
Entonces, la pregunta es ¿cómo sabías tú que estaban aprendiendo todos los alumnos?
Lo representaban en su cuaderno, ya sea por gráficas, la operación, y uno de cada pareja pasaba al pizarrón a explicarlo.
So they'd have like a drawing, representation, graphics, something in their journal, and then one of the students in the pair would go to the front and explain what they had been working on in their pair.
Y principalmente pasaban los chicos que no tenían la estampita, porque era el punto cuando ellos decían, yo entendí y yo paso, y trataban siempre ellos, era como el cambio, no pasa el de estampita, sino que pasa el compañero que no la tiene. Y entonces ese momento era como clave para mí.
And so the student that didn't have, or the students that did not have the stamps, the idea was that those would be the students that would go to explain, right? So not the ones that she already knew, understood, but the ones who maybe didn't understand before. So then you could see like if they had gotten it or not.
Again, a key word that I get is that Fatima was listening to her students, which is what David was doing. And I think that's one of the things that we're looking for, right? When we're eliciting understanding. So,
but just for making clear this, in her example, in Fatima's example, the evidence wasn't actually the stamp, because that was not something that will evidence what you know, but representations they used. I think that the teacher, in this case Fatima, listened from her students, and whatever they can express in a verbal way when they have to explain to each other. So that will be evidence, everything that will show their understanding. But I think that's a great example, because teachers commonly confuse the idea of the grade as an evidence, or this a stamp as an evidence, as the thing that was put from others will be the evidence that shows what you learn, and sometimes could not be an actually evidence.
Yes, I agree. That's the distinction between a quiz and something like this, right? Yeah. can you do this individually, or what's the role of cooperative learning in this? And I think this leads to like something we're going to talk about on Monday too. If I'm teaching a classroom and students are required to be socially distant, how do I elicit evidence of student thinking? But for us, we don't have that restriction yet. So is cooperative learning a requirement, or being able to talk to each other, at least in pairs?
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, may I, once I put, let's say, a problem on the board, and then I created a dialogue between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Okay, so Sherlock Holmes comes into my classroom and says, oh, look, these 4 quadrilaterals are squares, whatever. Then Dr. Watson says, how do you know? Well, elementary. Because of this, because of that, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that problem. So later on, I began to give these problems to the students because they were reluctant to create good arguments.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I let them choose 2 characters, Pinky and Cerebro, for instance, or Freud and his mama, Batman and Robin, whatever they wanted to choose.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the guys had to play the role of Sherlock Holmes,
Mm-hmm.
the guy with perfect logic, deduction, and the other one kind of, I don't quite get it.
Mm-hmm.
So between this dialogue, one of the characters was explaining the other in dialogues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, and of course, it's not only the way grade was, because it was graded actually, this one, it was okay, be creative, and 50% is okay. Yeah, it's only math, no problem at all. But it was very interesting the way they, by themselves, they were explaining the other characters. So that was very interesting experiment. And I have gotten beautiful, beautiful dialogues, and sometimes really funny, sometimes rather dull, and some amazing ones. No.
Yeah, interesting. They're learning to take the perspective of the others in there. Yeah. What do you think the role of cooperative learning is? What do you think, Kim?
Well, let me just back up a little bit because I think it's related. So when we talk about student thinking, there isn't a judgment or a value there that the thinking is correct. So I think we're veering the conversation, we're moving the conversation to say a little more about students thinking about what's right. But student thinking can be understanding why a student is thinking the way they are if it's not correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when you put kids in cooperative groups, you can have somebody who has a wrong answer, but they have a drawing that's actually going to be productive with a little more work. It could be really helpful. And so the other person may be the calculation whiz and is ready to just chug the numbers, move the numbers and make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when you're thinking about student thinking, you're not just looking for right thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You're really diving deep into, and I don't want to say wrong thinking, because I don't think it's wrong thinking. I think it's early thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, incomplete.
Early. Not even incomplete, early, because they have what they have. They are not looking ahead and saying, oh, I don't get all of this. They don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
What they have is what they have. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the honest place we have to meet them where they are,
Mm-hmm.
and then help them move forward.
Yeah. So those wrong answers are almost a necessary part. And if people aren't getting wrong answers, maybe something needs to change.
And I'm always suspicious of all right answers because you can't see the thinking underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
Right answers can be gotten by superficial strategies, but not necessarily be deep understandings that we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
That piece makes me think about how to be able to have evidence of student thinking, the level of cognition that's happening in students is automatically deepened, because for a student to be able to be metacognitive enough to explain in whatever way that might be, verbally or through any kind of representation, their own cognition has to be complex to be able to do that, and to recognize, this is why I think what I think. This is what I think, first of all, and the reason why is this. Like, that in itself is really complex. And so that's something to celebrate, and also greatly contributes to the learning process beyond just arriving at a correct answer. And in thinking about like cooperative learning, I think it's going to be particularly challenging, because we know that so many benefits come through talk and through working in groups and working with peers, but it's also not the only way for students to represent and learn from one another. And I think it requires a lot of creativity from teachers, and there is a lot of tools that are surfacing now, like for classrooms that have access to technology. Something like Flipgrid is a way for kids to be able to learn from one another's thinking and respond to it without having to have like face-to-face contact. So I think there's solutions, but also like breaches of equity and who has access to those, and the kinds of solutions that are going to work in different contexts, to be able to still get to that goal of having students build upon each other.
Yeah, it's one of the great limitations right now in today's world with the haves and have-nots regarding technology, because there are some really great resources and tools with it. Unfortunately, an inundation of tools. So now it's great. It'd be nice for really knowledgeable educators to sort of cull through them a little bit. Yeah.
Something that I just wanted to add, because this made me think of it just in context, and it kind of goes back to like how to make teachers also see the value of that process. Like there's this whole thing in Guatemala, and I'm not sure if it's the case in Ecuador or if at some point it was the case in the States, because honestly in my education I feel like they just like, it was very much you had to show every single step. But here it's like pasarlo en limpio, or like make it like literally whatever you've done on your other sheet where you've gone through the steps, you have eraser marks, you have like what the messy part is. It's like very much that's like a different sheet. Like the teacher wants to see the nice sheet where everything has been written exactly how it should be, and it doesn't include any of the process. It's just the answer, and like it looks good, and that's it. And so when we talk about this and all the importance of seeing the process that the student is going through when they're thinking, that's something that I just think like kind of right off the bat, like, well, that concept of that being important and that being something that we value. Also, like, we can't assume that it already exists and with a lot of teachers that we work in, because I know with the ones that we work with here, it doesn't. Like, it's not necessarily something that is already there. So just thinking of like context things. I just wanted to throw that in there.
I'm so glad you did, Alex, because that is, I think that's someplace we have to get to today, is to have an understanding of how we help teachers make that shift. Because I see all of those, and just tell me if I'm right, but I think what you're saying is all that scratch work is the evidence of their thinking. That's the really important stuff. I mean, I used to give my students more credit for saying, I have no idea how to do this problem, but I know it's about, I know you're looking for the equation of a line here, but I don't know how to do it. They get more credit for that than to write just a pure equation of a line, because I want them to show me what they're thinking. Do you guys agree that that's valuable, and is that sort of what we're looking for, Kim?
Yeah, I'm wondering how you could think about what the teacher wants out of that neat work. And so if you take their pedagogical goal of asking for neat work, and how could you turn it and craft it a little and say, well, if you took this other work, what would you get that's different? You know, how could you invite them to reflect on what they're missing, but not putting it that way, but like, what could you gain from looking at the other paper they didn't turn into you, or the eraser marks that are still there? I mean, what would be the motivation? That's what I'm wondering.
That's a really interesting way of thinking about that problem.
I must give a name for that. Every time I'm thinking on something like a draft, I'll take David's words, but he will say a napkin thinking. That's probably what you, yeah, because David, and every time I remember when I was studying math, every time that I have any idea that I want to, before sorting it or before trying to make it look great, you have a napkin close to you, near to you, and then you will write everything you have in mind, and that napkin will be that draft.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great.
We can call them napkin thinking when we talk about that.
I love that.
I like that.
It seems to me like the first step for that, like, okay, so the question is, how do we help shift a teacher from let's look at only the clean page to everything? I had this really lucky experience once where I was, financially it wasn't so lucky, but I was only teaching 2 classes. I was part-time. I worked 40 hours a week, but it gave me the chance to read every student's homework and respond to them. I go, I see what you did here, but I don't understand what's happening. And I just marks all over their paper, and I'd ask them to look through it. And we learned a lot that year. I took that, and when I had every class, I would do 1 or 2 problems that I would try to respond to. Not just a you're right or you're wrong, but I want to be able to say, I see your thinking here. That's something Susan Freer would ask me to do. And if I didn't, I would explain why. Do you think that's something that would, what do you think about that idea, Kim, first? And then do you guys think that's something that could work? Or Linda, do you think that could work with teachers in Guatemala or Ecuador?
I'm putting myself there as I think.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Linda, if you have something specific. All right, well, I'll go. So I wonder if you set up examples where, I mean, as a coach and somebody in that mentoring coaching role, asking a teacher to think a little differently, because what you're asking a teacher to do is change something they believe makes education better. And so when you're coming up against that, you have to honor where they're coming from, because they're doing of the best intentions for what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so asking them to change is asking them to compromise. So what is it you can invite them to think about? And I wonder if you gave an example where everything was perfect, but at the end they had one small mistake, or everything was perfect, but it turns out it came from someone else. So posing situations where you can see that this gave us less information than when we get the napkin thinking, for example. Mm-hmm. Or you give a particularly interesting napkin response and say, what do you see out of this? What do you think the student understands? It's almost like giving them a contrast between the napkin thinking and the clean thinking. Did you call it pasa a limpiar? Is that what it was?
Yeah, well, here at least that's how, I don't know if that's what you guys say in Ecuador, but in Guatemala, yeah, it's pasarlo en limpio.
Limpio.
Pasarlo en limpio. It's like you're making it clean.
Pasarlo a limpio, así. Pasarlo a limpio.
That's great.
The same words here. Yeah.
A clean pass at it. I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
What Kim, you pointed out, it's very, very interesting. And I remember I have worked just randomly with teachers, but in Galapagos, actually, it was that the teachers were presenting problems, and then I asked them, okay, give me some hints how to solve this problem.
Ooh.
Giving this problem, give me 4 hints. So of course, they have to think. Give me only 3 hints, and give me 2 hints. That's it. That's enough. 2 hints, or maybe just 1. So they needed to think about the problem and say, okay, what kind of hint should I give? And that means you are not telling the teacher exactly how to change. He is thinking about the problems he's placing and thinking about the hints. And at the same time, he said, oh, maybe I should look for this. So it was a very interesting exercise for the teachers. It was it was sad because only 6 teachers or 9 teachers were there. Well, you know how San Cristobal is.
Small place. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a very interesting exercises.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Because if you think about what kind of hints they would give, it tells you what the teacher is thinking the learning process is. Wow, you're nodding your head. What do you think?
Yeah, I've seen that. I try that in San Cristobal too, and in the last institute. And the teachers thought that the hints were not deep hints. It was like you have to start with an X. So that's the hint. You have to add some equal there. So that's the hint. So those were the kind of things that they will add as a hint, because that also shows the kind of understanding or the way they think the teaching it's all about. So yeah, I remember that and trying that too.
That hint. Go ahead, Callie, go ahead.
It connects a lot to like the question about learning trajectories and if that's essential knowledge.
Right.
Because I was going to say the same thing, like that idea of giving a hint is actually something that I really struggle with the teachers who lead Girls STEM Club, and helping them support students without giving an answer or telling students exactly what to do. And so one of the questions that comes back to me then is, okay, part of this, so much of this about using student thinking is so that the teacher can make a decision. Well, what does that mean for us when we know that so many teachers who we work with, content knowledge is really limited, and they don't yet know how to make a decision, like what decisions are even possible and what that even means. And so, you know, we can teach strategies for eliciting student thinking fairly quickly, but when I'm thinking about how do we support teachers in using student thinking to plan their next steps, that's a much bigger problem or area of work, because there's so much there. It requires so much flexibility, and you know, thinking about and connecting to lesson planning too. Like, you can't use this with a scripted lesson plan. You have to be ready to make a decision in the moment and change or adapt or adjust what you're going to say. And so it really does require a high level of knowledge and expertise of the teacher. And so what does that mean for us? How do we support teachers in that?
Wow. Yep.
I'm sorry, I had to leave for a bit. I got a phone call, but so if I'm repeating something that's already been said, I apologize. But 2 things, I think, you asked wonderful questions. I think we all have to keep in mind that this is not an overnight process. So as teachers begin to do this, my content knowledge grew a whole lot from just listening to kids and thinking about what they were saying. So I think that's a part of it, not just kind of getting out of that mindset as my way is the only way and the right way. And that takes time to do. The other thing is, I think that it's closely connected to the practice that we talked about in posing purposeful questions. You have to practice not asking leading questions, but asking open-ended questions that really give kids the opportunity to explain their thinking. And listening to students thinking, and I may not, you know, more than once I said to kids, you know, that's really interesting. I need to think about that. I never thought about it that way before. But giving them permission not to always have to be the expert. And myself in the classroom, it took me a long time I would say that I probably worked 4 or 5 years on asking good questions and recognizing, and more than once I said to kids, that was not the right question for me to be asking. I mean, just to admit it. That was a really dumb question I just asked. So you have to be willing to be a little bit vulnerable. But I think the big thing is you have to realize this takes time. it's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to necessarily even happen in 2 years. They're going to build their content knowledge. Heck, I've been doing this for over 30 years and I'm still building content knowledge, listening to other teachers. And, you know, I don't think anybody understands it perfectly. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
That's a really good point. So we help them start to feel comfortable learning along with their students. And probably if I teach the same material 4 years, fourth time through, my content knowledge will be deeper if I've learned to discover with my students and learning to make their thinking visible or elicit evidence of their thinking helps me learn with them.
I think with teachers of older grades, it's helpful to distinguish between content knowledge, the math that you know, and the pedagogical content knowledge, the knowledge of how students learn these ideas can be counterproductive actually to good mathematics, if you will, sometimes. I mean, okay, let me not say
elaborate on that some people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say that you go and you get a math degree and you become a high school math teacher. You've mastered the math that you were taught in your university. And then you go and you teach high school and you know all the math that the high schoolers are going to learn. What you don't know is how high schoolers process that mathematics and how they arrive at the understandings and where they've come from the early grades to bring that knowledge forward, because really all you know is what you did. And so becoming aware of how other people make sense of ideas, if you've never paid attention in your own classes to how other people learn, then you're starting from scratch. And some secondary teachers have a long journey to learn how other people learn. I mean, the problem's not the problem, but the issue is a little different in elementary. For younger students, then they may be building content knowledge, but in that secondary, it's a different issue.
What do you guys think about that idea? I'm going to elaborate on it in a moment. One thing I thought about, because you wrote something similar to me in sort of a note on one of the questions, and I think it's interesting when adults look at tools for kids and from an adult mind, and they go, "Oh my God, that's amazing," but really it's amazing for you, the adult, because the other thing, Kim, is you may not remember how middle school kids learn. You probably learned that way as a middle schooler too, and you don't remember how you thought that way. So to me, this is the question. I think great teachers are super sleuths. You know what that means? Super sleuth is like an investigation, a private eye. In what way are teachers a private investigator, and what are they trying to solve?
Detectives, yeah.
Yeah, how are they detectives? What do you guys think? This is for any one of you five. Linda and Kim may have an answer already.
Estamos en la pregunta 6, ¿verdad? ¿No?
7.
Okay. Ahora veo.
Detectives of how ideas are getting connected, for instance.
Okay, where? For whom?
The students, how do they connect ideas, for instance? And it reminded me of a problem I gave to my students, and finally they asked for a hint. I gave a hint, and one of the students told me, "I didn't use your hint at all." Then I said, "Well, that's great. Explain that to me."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I'm sorry. Yes, your solution is much better than mine, actually, but forgive me, I am limited by my experience." Sometimes that's a problem with people who, for instance, talking about the teachers, they learn a lot of math and they go to high school. Sometimes they are limited by their experience. So they need to start from scratch, as you said before, you know. Okay, this learning and teaching process is not that trivial. We have to think twice about it. So That's why it's interesting, this word that you use. I cannot say it, but it's super detective.
Yeah, super sleuth, but a detective. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
What else are you trying to figure out? So as a teacher, what are you trying to really figure out?
It's kind of reflecting clues and evidence. That's the word that comes to my mind. So
Yeah.
you are collecting evidence in order to connect things and understand the level, or in which level of understanding your students are. And for that, absolutely, you need to know your really have clear how do you say metas? I forgot that word.
Goals.
Goals, yeah.
Practice,
You
yeah.
have to have to clear goals
Mhm.
because as we talked before, you know, you need to go to know where you are going, where do you want your students to go. So those clues or those evidence will help you understand as a map where are them, and how you can help them to improve or to get to the place you want them to go. So that's what this whole evidence is about, for me at least.
Right. Yeah.
As a teacher, I like to, well, I have a mathematical concept quite clear in my mind. And then I ask the students, or I try to understand the images of this concept. What is the image of this concept that the students have? Because sometimes this image is not complete. Sometimes they lack something, and sometimes they put something additional that I never talk about, or not the book. So how do you see, if this is the concept, how the image they have in their brain fits with this concept? And of course, you have to develop many, many different little tasks to figure it out. In higher mathematics, of course, it's much easier.
Yeah, there's a different fine line there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, yeah, I mean, I think the goal is to understand the student thinking, right? And have you guys heard this word, to make student thinking visible? Is that sort of similar to this? Could we call this chapter how to make student thinking visible? Would that make sense, Kim, or is this more than that?
I think it's also strategies for seeking opportunities.
Oh, interesting.
To
Tell me
make,
more about that.
so you can, I mean, you can look at student thinking, but if you're looking at it from a source that's not going to give you great answers, like if you give a multiple choice test, you may not get really good starting points. You may just get, oh, okay, they drew a picture, but I don't know what they would have done if this answer wasn't there. So what is their thinking, and what's the best way to get at that thinking? How much do I open the task so that, like, divergent pathways, things that come from different angles, come in towards the same goal? So, I mean, the thing I was thinking of a minute ago, and I can't remember what it said, but I was thinking of Kathy Fosno's landscape. There's somebody who talks about how students learn. And so if you see it, I just wrote this here, I was thinking about it, is you have your goal up here. I mean, if we think about it this way, we limit what we're saying and what we want kids to do. But if we think of it this way, there's all kinds of pathways that students take to achieve this goal, even if they start here, the same place. There's circular pathways, you know, there's all kinds of stuff that happens that we lose if we only think levels and getting better and aiming towards the goal. So in your eliciting, if you're taking it from these different places, when the student's way out here and you say, oh, what are they thinking? You might get something to help somebody who's way over here to move towards the goal. It's I'm thinking of it as more open, Chad, is that the eliciting
Yes.
from different places.
I'm thinking that takes time in the classroom.
Ted, you just modeled beautifully a wonderful way for teachers to help kids make their thinking visible. And that doesn't have to be necessarily writing, but when you said to Kim, tell me more about what you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then being quiet and letting the kid, the student talk about their thinking and struggle through doing it, because that's much harder. And it's harder for teachers because I think for most of us, we were never given the opportunity to do that. The focus was always on getting the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
So, just those simple words, tell me more about what you're thinking, really gets kids to start understanding the importance of thinking mathematically and being able to describe their thinking. And I think the earlier we can start that, the more powerful it becomes.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a wonderful way to elicit student thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a classroom like this, so we're looking at a classroom now where we have sort of the teacher as the private investigator trying to understand what the students are thinking. What's the energy in that classroom like? Do you see it different? Because in a lecture, the energies describe that first of all. Like in a classroom that you've experienced that's like a lecture, what's the energy in that classroom? From the teacher and the student. And then how does that shift?
For me, is the difference between something rigid and something that has movement.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Because when you are lecturing something, then you are speaking and the other ones are just listening, and this kind of straight things. So this is the way, this is how I think as a teacher, and the way is the best. So it's really squared or rigid. But then when we are thinking in a different way, then we have to move around. And as Kim showed, I love that way of explaining. It's different paths, different movements, some straight, some not, some going around, going back, going forward. So it's a lot of movement in the class physically, because you have to do that. You have to hear from others, you have to move and look for other solutions, and you have to come back to your places. Also, because when you're thinking in a classic traditional class, then students are really sitting down in a chair and looking in front, do not move, and moving is bad in the class. So it's also physically, but also mentally, because you have to just look and do not think anything else than what the teacher is saying. In the other way around, we are thinking on moving in your thoughts, going back, going forward, moving physically. Everything is movement for me. So that's the difference and with this metaphor.
To follow up on that, I was just thinking in your first example, when the teacher's talking, the title of this section would be How to Show the Students What I'm Thinking, which frankly is fun. I mean, you got to admit, it's certainly fun to go, hey, look how good I am at this problem. But that's not what teachers do. So good point.
But Chad, I think some teachers think that that's good teaching.
Yes, it is. That's right.
It's a fair, honest model, because a lot of people do that because they think in their heart as a good teacher that they are communicating the best way possible. To them, that's the gift. So if we know from what we learn from teaching and learning that may not be the best way, how do you engage that belief that I'm doing the right thing?
Right.
And open it up a little bit so that maybe they can reconsider that very honest belief.
That's a great point.
It's important to recognize that doesn't come from a bad place.
Right. Absolutely. Teachers care about what they want to do. And yeah, absolutely. Most of the time. I have a professor too.
Trust that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point though, because teachers want to help their students and they come from this point. And to me, what we're doing is redefining what a teacher's job description is, really. My job description isn't to show you how I've thought about these things, and I've been doing this for a long time, so I really know the best way. That may be a point to get to at some point in the activity, but the teacher's job is to know your students.
I have a question
Yeah.
that made me think about. So I know when I was teaching elementary school, there was we learned a lot about how, particularly for reading comprehension, modeling and doing like a think aloud, read aloud helps students to access more complex cognitive processes that they didn't have access to previously. Is there a place for that in math? And if so, what does it look like?
Fernando gave a good example of that, where grade my work. You know, you give me a grade on my work, on my proof. He used the example of a proof. Mm-hmm. Tell me how my proof was, and then justify it. So sure, yeah, absolutely. You can model something, but then when you do, you have to make sure that what you're modeling is something they can imitate. They can't imitate an end goal. They can't imitate the end of the learning, but they can imitate a strategy that helps you think about moving forward. But to model a perfect solution is only going to help certain kids who may already be thinking that way. So I'm thinking of that word meta, where you're modeling something above the actual problem and more of a strategy.
The process, maybe.
Yeah, it's like, well, I need to look at this problem and I have to identify what my unknowns are. Mm-hmm. And because that's good practice. So I know that my time is an element and my distance is a variable. So I'm going to write this here so I know what I'm looking for. That's moving towards an answer, but it's really more about process. So I guess what you're modeling is what matters.
I think it connects back to our Global Math Stories Live too, because just the format of that, we're on Facebook Live, and so it's just the teacher or the facilitator of that talking. And so I know as I've been like planning through Naomi's sessions with her, we've talked a lot about like how can she ask questions and talk about her own thinking in a way that opens up students' minds of like, oh, there's a lot of different ways to think about this. And one thing that I think she does really well is she says like, maybe you think this, or maybe you're thinking this, or maybe you have a totally different idea. And so she's like validating that there's all of these different possibilities. And maybe for a student or any learner who's only thinking about like, oh, this is my idea, and then they stop there. And then it's creating a model that there could be more than one way to think about it without saying, it's this. But,
yeah.
Eso que lo que dice Cali es como interesante, porque respecto a las historias de mate mundial, cuando las estamos dando es como literal, está la compu, pero atrás de mi compu, en mi mente es como, ahí está uno, allí está el otro sentado, y tal vez no lo venga uno, pero se los prometo que pues como hablando, moviéndome, a veces hasta me paro y es como, no sé, le da como otro sentido a la historia cuando uno lo está contando.
Ajá, y Fátima, algo que tú haces también es tú dices como, un estudiante me ha dicho esto, y eso es el mismo concepto, que estás comunicando a la audiencia que hay más que una manera de pensar en algo, y eso es como una manera de modelar algo que se abre los mentes y no solamente decir así es. Es muy bonito.
Yeah, that's nice.
So I think Fatima does the same thing. As I was telling her, she'll say, one of my students told me this, one of my students told me this. And so she, like without physically having students present, is bringing different kinds of possible student thinking into the conversation. And what she was saying is that she imagines that her students are here in front of her. And so she's moving around and like imagining how she's interacting with a class, even though it's just her computer screen.
Nice. Very good. I like that. This is good. That's going to be good for Monday. And we're going to talk about that in about 10 minutes. One thing that I do as a teacher is I really try to erase my knowledge of the topic that I'm teaching. And that helps me stop talking less. But I think it also pushes me to think about what the students, because I want to know what the students are thinking. And then when I know what the students are thinking, I can use that. Maybe this is me showing my process too, and come up with ways to get to the solution with that if they need that guidance. But otherwise, I want them to do that as well. Or I might think about it, go, oh, you're here. Here's how we need to get to this post. From there, now let's see how you do it. But to me, that has been a helpful thing. Does it make sense to anyone to sort of erase your knowledge of just that topic? What do you think, Kim? I'm seeing a facial reaction.
You know, when I teach big problems, like I taught a shell center task in this summer.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know those, you should know those. Those are really good.
Yeah. Okay. Shell center.
Shell center. Yeah, it's like a shell, like
Yeah.
in the ocean. But it's CENTRE because they're in Nottingham, England.
Oh.
But when I teach big problems like that one, I try to not know the answer.
Yeah.
I find if I know the answer, I respond differently to kids who are at the answer, close to the answer. I mean, I look through it and I try to anticipate what kids might do, but I never go all the way to the end to solving it. And I know that goes against all advice anybody would ever give you.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I find that I just channel people too much if I know the problem too well, because I can't see what's happening out here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's not normal advice.
Well, you know, you have the structure to solve the problem. You have everything in the outline. You just don't have all the words in the outline. So that's it's not like you're not doing your homework.
Sometimes I don't know how it's going to end. Like I taught a problem this summer, that one I was telling you about. I don't know the answer still. I still don't. And it makes people crazy when I do PD because I never just wrap it up and tell them the answer. People get mad.
Yeah.
They want to know what the answer is. Like, I'm not telling you because I don't know it.
Professional development.
Yeah, sorry. Professional development. Teachers
Kim, I
always
do that too. You're not the only one.
Yeah.
I would intentionally not work out the whole problem. I mean, I knew the path I might take, but I didn't because I wanted to see how kids thought about it. And I was always amazed by the different ways that they solved it, sometimes better than mine. Just kept thinking, I never thought of it that way before. But also, you just said something that rang a bell. I'm sorry, I forgot it. But I think what you just said is really powerful. It gives us permission not to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that goes back to what you said, Chad. Permission not to know everything.
Yeah. Now, from my experience, which is not nearly as much as you're all working in schools in Guatemala and Ecuador, that might be a challenge for a teacher to say, no, I haven't done this problem in advance, to a leader. What do you think about that? And how do we shift their job description again, so that that's something that they should do rather than them not doing enough work? What do you guys think?
I think what we're talking about right now is actually more connected to the experience of our teachers, of many of our teachers, but also contradicts the idea that it requires a deep content knowledge or pedagogical that is the piece that still needs to be there. Like if they are thinking, okay, I'm going to erase my own knowledge right now so that I can explore this with my students, that might be where they are. But then does that take away, well, then what happens when they need to make a decision to get to the next step, or not necessarily step, but to move student thinking or to guide student thinking? Without that knowledge, then what? Yeah,
well, I mean, you still have it there. It's just it's a guide. You have to. I tried to rebuild it, but I know what I'm rebuilding. It's like imagine, you ever heard, I don't know if you're too young, but someone told me once that you have to build the same house 3 times before it's perfect. And having renovated a few houses now, I understand that very well. And it's like that. It's like, I've already done this house, built this house of knowledge in my head. I'm going to now redo it with these students here. So there's the knowledge. But I like what you're saying, Callie, because on the one hand, we can say to the teachers too, embrace what you don't know. That's fine. You don't have to know it. You shouldn't know it. Good teachers don't know all the answers. Yeah.
I have a way I might address that. Like, okay, so let me go back to my model here. All right, so I've drawn a slightly different version. So if you go back to this model, here's your start point. What I know is I've already studied the problem enough to go here, and I know that kids could do these types of things. But because I know this field of knowledge here, I've predicted, well, they might go this way, they might go that way, they could go this way.
Mhm.
But I'm still ready for that kid who pops out in this corner over here because I have a really broad understanding what happens in here. So wherever kids arrive at this place, I have the content knowledge to know how to get them all the way to the goal. It's not that you don't know anything. You may not know which of these paths they'll start on, but once you recognize, oh, he's going to do that with the proportion. I never thought of that. And then boom, you're here and you know how to help them get here. It's not that you go with nothing. It's that you go with no preconceived notions of how you should get there or what the best way would be to get there. Does that make sense? Because I think you're right. We were contradicting ourselves there.
And do you have any recommendations of resources that we can use in supporting teachers develop that rich content knowledge that they need to be able to anticipate student possibilities for student thinking, and to help support teachers in developing the confidence to say, no matter what they say, I can do something with that. We can work from there.
So the area of study on that is called learning trajectories, but you have to be really careful what you look for in that. And I can give you particular content area resources, because sometimes those learning trajectories come from a place where we understand how kids think and this is how they tend to go. And some learning trajectory research will say, here's what the standards say, here's the next place to go.
Mhm.
Well, that's a very different question. Your standards are very different than the way kids learn sometimes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Mhm.
But there are people who are trying to figure out, if you give kids this type of experience, what will they do next? And how can you predict that? So if you have a particular grade or strand, I can make some recommendations, because there's a lot of different places to look for that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
what we want to avoid is teachers then thinking like, okay, now these are concrete steps and my students have to think here and then here and then here and then here.
Right. Right.
Chad, what might help are the Fosno landscapes of Kathy Fosno's books with Martin Dolk.
Yeah, I don't know if we have that stuff. Well, because also Jer Comfrey does learning trajectories. That's one of her.
I
Yep.
have a comment there, because even we look for some references. What I've seen is that they are from students and teachers from a special place. So this also might not represent exactly the cultural background there, and we have to be really careful with that. So I think kind of answering your question, Kali, because I don't have the answer, but my thoughts are is that we should encourage teachers to start listening a little bit more to their students in order to understand what they are thinking, because I think they are the best people in the world that can understand what they are thinking. So we might have some ideas of the possible wrong common mistakes that they will do in some math problems, but I've seen that in my classes, especially the ones that I've been teaching for a long time, I know what they are thinking, or they might be thinking, because of the experience. The experience gave me that, not the books, because my students are different from other students, and even those from the US or from Guatemala. So I really think we shouldn't try to attach that to a special content, but to start helping them to listen to their students and paying attention to what's going on actually in their classes.
Yes, I think that's critical, Paul, and that's sort of that's really the theme, right, of this all these 8 steps has been: let your students do the work. You are the guide. You are the facilitator. You're the elicitor. restater, but so these are your students thinking. But then the point that I hear Callie making is we want teachers to have pretty good content knowledge, and we want them to know what that means. Paul, you know your math, man. I'm telling you, you can sometimes knock me out with your math knowledge. So I know it's good, and that's there. The thing that I think is whenever we do workshops with teachers, we have to start with the math problem. It has to be a rich mathematical task, not only because it models the kind of teaching we want them to do, but because they become better mathematicians at it. And look, I taught Susan Friel's connected math, and frankly, we can get that in Spanish. There are tasks in there that build number sense that are just really powerful, because once you start building number sense, in some ways you go, oh, this is how I build knowledge in math. And I think those would be great ways to start. That would be something we should always do, as a really meaningful task at the beginning of each workshop. And I think you're doing that.
So Paul, one way to do that is to create a reflection sheet for those lessons, those big lessons like that, and say, as a teacher, I saw this, this, and this. This is how I responded, this, this, this. Next time, I will do this. And that goes in their unit plan. So next time they teach it, they see what they did, what the students did, and then what they would like to do differently. So it's a simple sheet that goes with their lesson planning materials.
As tracking or tracking evidence from themselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Then it's theirs, or a team if they're working with someone else.
I love that idea. Yeah.
Yep. And you guys, the Kim is being like the perfect model for exactly why we do this thing. It's because I want you guys to know Kim and Peg and Steve Linewan, because that's brilliant. And so you guys need to be talking with Kim about these ideas too. So this is good. Glad you have the relationship. So one thing that I want to say is I think it's really critical that, when students can work together, we're eliciting the thoughts of all the students, and they're all participating in the mathematical task. They're participating in the feedback. And so, I was told when I started doing group work, I should assign a timekeeper and a person who's a note taker and a whatever. But that's hard to do. If I'm the timekeeper, I'm not going to be doing the math. I'm going to be watching the clock. And so I think we changed the dynamic. On the one hand, you're not doing group work to turn something in for a grade. You're doing group work to learn as a team. And if you're learning as a team, you need everyone to participate in that task of learning as a team, not doing the other things. So of course, it takes time to teach people. This is what made Joe Fuller famous, really, is that you have to experience the math this way for a while to really buy into it. And then once you do experience it this way for a while, don't even try to change it, because kids they're sold on it. If you lecture kids, they'll be like, stop. And that's wonderful. But that's sort of one of the things I want to get. Any questions or thoughts? Because I want to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about Monday if we can. But what are your questions with Kim here or Linda?
I have a question. One of your questions in the guide was, what about having this kind of quizzes at the end, because of the modeling here with the Mrs. I don't remember the name, but with this example, and she asked at the end, so let's recap, let's make a resume from what we've learned, and that's a great. But you asked that question, like, should we do this all the time? And I want to hear your thoughts about that, because I have my own, but I want to hear yours.
Okay. Kim, you want to go first? Do you want me to, or are you asking me first, Paul?
Yeah, go first, Chad.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm asking right now, so
No,
you are able to answer.
Good. Yeah, to me, all class was a quiz, and I didn't want to waste time having them do individual work. I wanted the work that they did individually to push their knowledge, and that's the time for reflection in a lot of ways. Now there's end of chapter tests, and even in those, though, I would push their knowledge, and I used to have kids go, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know this," during the test. That was the perfect test to me. So for me, a quiz at the end of the test a day doesn't always work. An exit question is a good thing. Linda talks about those a lot. I was never organized enough to do it, but that would be something. But I spent my class period time just listening to their thinking, and getting to the point where I didn't talk much. I just listened because they were all talking to each other. And that was for me what I thought. But I also think it's an easy to read this and go, let's just give a quiz at the end of every day. That's not the answer to me. What do you think, Kim?
I think a quiz at the end of a day robs students of the opportunity of taking overnight to think about something, even if they're just sleeping on it and it's in the back of their head, or how they process it overnight with time is important for some brains to take time to do that. And so if you were to ask me to do that at the end of a class, I would be like, I don't know, because I don't think that way. I need time to, even if I'm not doing it actively, I'm always sort of, playing with it in the back of my mind. So for me, an exit ticket might be more of a reflection. I want to know what it is they're taking away. So we've done a lot of things for an hour, 55 minutes, because you're right, Chad, you're taking up good instructional time. What is one thing you are taking away from class today? And to me, that's a bit of an evidence of student thinking, because it tells me like, well, I'm wondering how 3 A's can be less than a half when there's an 8 in it. Okay, I can deal with that. I can understand. I didn't have to ask him which is greater, 1/2 or 3/8, because he told me something.
So Kim, with that question, the perfect assessment to me is something that not only helps you understand what the kids are thinking, but pushes the kids to think further. And that sets up reflection for the night. It also has them ask themselves these challenging questions. And so I like that a lot. Linda, do you have a thought about that? How do you do exit questions? Because you ask great ones if you're still with us.
She does.
Yeah. Now you guys have to come back for the next episode for
myself. Remember, I'm working on an iPad tonight. It's not quite as easy as the computer. Actually, an exit ticket was where I was going to head. And even when I'm working with teachers, we have a 3-2-1 exit ticket, and you could modify it any way you want. Where you're even asking kids, what are 3 things you learned today? What are 2 things you still have questions about? What is one, however you want to word that. But it really, that reflection piece, rather than I'm quizzing you on, can you get this right now? Mm-hmm. The whole thing we've been talking about takes the focus off of getting the right answer and really focusing more on where are kids at this point in time and they're thinking about a particular concept. So I love that 3-2-1 exit ticket. You could change it to 2-1 or anything where kids are really, and they feel that they're safe to say, I'm not quite getting this yet. I need to talk about it some more, or I don't understand this yet. Or I got this nailed down. I'm good to go. And it really puts it's kind of a self-evaluation rather than the teacher always being the evaluator. And I like that.
Yeah.
So
I love that too. I love the 3-2.
I just one small thing to add to that. I love that you brought that, Linda, because I love exit tickets too. But what I've noticed with my teachers when I'm having a PD session, once we give them a tool like that, they want to use them everywhere. So, so that's something I really want to mention here, because I love the exit tickets, but I don't think it's for every lesson. Yeah, as a quiz, as the example we read in the book, you can ask sometimes to do something to recap, but sometimes it's not necessary. So I don't think those kind of tools are just part of your box tool that you can make use sometimes and sometimes not. They are really great, and the more you have is great, the greater rich lessons you have, but shouldn't be for all of them and just one. So that's what came to my mind when I read your question. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, it takes us right back to the very first question, which why I call it eliciting student learning, because to me it's active. It's this process, and if I just have this, I'm going to use item 5 every time, that's not me really dynamically eliciting student learning. That's just me doing the assessment. So that's something, yeah.
Just one quick question, comment before we end up this. How do you encourage that? So when I talk to teachers, once in a while I pick up a problem, and sometimes I have to say that I make things up. For instance, how Gauss could have solved this problem? How Cauchy sometimes say, okay, what about Cauchy's wife? How she could have solved this problem. So I present the same problem, many solutions with different math people. And sometimes I said, okay, what do you think, especially with Cauchy, I could remember now, what is Cauchy's criticism to Cauchy's wife's way of solving the problem? Because sometimes you have to be a little bit, especially in college, a little bit more formal. Just don't play carelessly with the infinity. You have to be a little bit careful with those things. But in that context, you present many solutions of the same problem, attributing to different people. So they already have in front of them different ways of thinking.
So what I would love in the perfect class for me, I present the problem, and because the students are all figuring out the problem, the answer themselves, those different solutions come into the classroom. And then Paul tells everyone her solution, and Dave, you go, hold on, that doesn't make sense to me. Why did you do that? And then Paul goes, well, here's why I did that. And you go, are you serious? And then you talk to the person right next to you, and he goes, yeah, look. And then there's that dynamic. In the perfect class, then as a teacher, you're just pointing to people because everyone's doing the work. That's the dream. And there are a lot of times when I'm teaching, they'll go, well, what do you think the answer? I'll go, I don't know. You're the smarty pants. Tell me, and I'll go, you're the know it. I mean, I just come here to learn from you all. So now, of course, when we get into a bind, I'll do it. But I'll never forget one time that we had like literally 5 minutes left in college, and someone else had to come into the room. I was like, you guys, we don't have time. I'm just gonna tell you the answer. And everyone goes, no, stop, just leave. We'll figure it out, because they sort of bought into it. So that's what I would say is take a breath, center yourself, and listen, and just let them do it, and then be there to be like the bailout if they need it. It's a little harder because the concepts are much more advanced in college, but ideally they're ready for them and they can do that. Yeah. Okay, so for the last 4 minutes, let me tell you what Monday will look like. So what we've learned, I mean, look, if we can weave each of these 8 ideas into our practices as a teacher, I think that we'd all be fantastic teachers. And my goal is to get teachers to that point. And what I initially thought would do is we talk about the role of the student and the teacher. But then, frankly, in some conversations with Kim, I realized the thing I really want to know, which is much harder, is how do we weave these 8 practices into our lessons today? If I'm doing an online lesson, it's a little easier, I believe. But how does that happen in virtual lessons? How do we ask great questions and elicit student thinking in an online setting? But more importantly, think about some of the places we're working. Kids don't have 2 computers, or they don't have an iPad that they can use if their computer's not working. They have a teacher who maybe has to drive to their house and go, hey, here's the problem. Now, what does that look like? And so the question I have is, when we're socially distanced, or if we're in a classroom where we're not allowed to work in groups necessarily, how do we do this? And frankly, I'm not exactly sure yet how that looks, and I'm going to give everyone a chance to think about it. But what I'd like for Alex, Callie, Pao, and Fatima to do is to write some questions, if you can, over the next couple of days that you might have, thinking about these 8 practices in that context, so that I can give it to everyone. And really, you all should be honored, because every single person is enthusiastically coming back. James Burnett's waking up at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. to do this again. And it's because every single one of them just loves talking with you all. So you guys are pretty amazing. And Dave, I'm really glad you came, David, because I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it too. And you're welcome to come on Monday if you want as well. So ask questions yourself too.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Does that
Will
make
it
sense?
be at the same time, Chad?
Yes, 4 o'clock. Yes,
4 o'clock Eastern time.
Eastern time. Yes.
Okay.
But for probably 1 hour.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Just
Dang it! I
remember
was going to
that
ask
we
Paul
have
for an hour and a half.
1 hour.
In about 5 minutes. So okay, dang it! I
Do
want
you
this for
really
longer.
think that's
Pardon me?
necessary? Do you think that's necessary? Because we're gonna record that. I can handle that. Do you think
Yeah, well,
that
if we
will
can go
be
over a little
great
bit,
to have?
it'd be nice to be able to
Okay.
go maybe an hour and a half.
Yeah, let's try to do it in an hour, and if we take 10 minutes, that's okay. 10:30
Perfect.
till 30. 1 hour and a half will be the maximum. I can arrange that in the marathon de math. That's okay.
Thank you, Paul. And just so you all know, we're also going to put it have it on our YouTube channel in English. And I'm going to connect to a couple of places because to me, the stuff that we'll learn, hopefully on Monday, will be really valuable for teachers in the US as well. So, sound good?
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, David. Thank you, Linda. As
Great.
always,
And
thank you,
Chad,
everyone.
question. You said you want us to send questions to you, so beforehand, like that people
Yes.
can look at before
Yes.
Monday.
If you could send them to me by the end of the day on Saturday, that'd be great because James Burnett
Okay.
needs to see it.
Okay.
Hey, can I ask everybody what the verb is in Spanish for elicit?
Elicit.
I can say that.
Yes.
With uso, obtención y uso. Let me check it out.
Promover mejor. Provocar.
No, I don't think it's that the great translation, but that's what the version in the Spanish version from the book.
Hay una.
Obtención y uso de la evidencia del pensamiento del estudiante. That was the exact translation from
Obtención.
the
Okay.
Spanish version. Yeah.
De hecho, hay la palabra elicitar, pero la Real Academia de la Lengua dice que no es necesario. It's unnecessary to use this word elicitar because in Spanish there are proper words, but they have adopted this word in Spanish as well.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
So, ¿cuál es la diferencia entre obtención e elicitar?
No mucha, por eso la Real Academia de la Lengua quiere evitar el uso de la palabra elicitar y quiere usar más bien promover, provocar, obtener, en ese sentido.
Okay.
Más obtener, diría yo.
Obtener. Okay, bueno. Okay.
Great.
Gracias.
Thank you, guys. I truly love these.
Thank you. Thanks, Chav, Kim,
Right.
Linda, Kelly, Ali,
Gracias.
Fátima. Chao, Fátima. Chao, Pau.
Hey, Chad.
Adiós.
Oh, yeah.
Fatima.
We're going to stay. Yes. I'm not going to. Yes. We're going to. Callie is going to stay with. Oh, she's left.
You can get her back.
Yeah.
Chad, could you send me, are you allowed to send me the principles to action in Spanish?
Yeah. We have it. I can't send it to you, but Paul can.
Okay.
Yes.
That would be lovely if you could arrange that. I would like to do my 1-2 minute intro in Spanish and then go to English after.
Oh, good. I love it. That'd be awesome. Good for you. Yes. Okay. So let's. Yep. I'm supposed to see Pal, so she's supposed to come back on. So I'll ask her. That's
All
good.
right.
Thank you, Kim. What'd you think?
I actually have written a book outline as we were talking. To be honest with you, I have scratched all kinds of notes, and some of the things they were saying made me think of what could be in a chapter, because I've been trying to turn this into a book idea, and I got a lot of ways of how they think about it can help me think about it.
Great.
You get in your own head too much. It's hard to do something useful, but yeah.
That's great. I'm glad. Well, I loved your participation. You have such interesting ways of thinking about things, and so And
Yeah.
also halfway through, I was like, dang it, she'd be so much better at my job than me.
No, I wouldn't.
You were really good.
No, you're good at getting people to do this with you.
Well, good. I'm glad.
That's your job. You can have that one.
Good. The coaching is really good. I'm glad that we're connected to you because some of the things you were saying is so helpful. I mean, my dream is that we do redefine the way they think about teaching in Ecuador. And it starts with us helping those few coaches make that shift.
But it's so important to honor where they're coming from. I run into a lot of older traditional teachers, and they believe they're doing the best thing because some of their students succeed better that way. And that's the God's honest truth. So you have to acknowledge that, but that doesn't mean it works for everyone.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know. That was a hard lesson I had to learn when I was trying to push something on somebody once, and they said, yeah, but, you know, I believe this is the best thing to do. That's important.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think it's a critical lesson. That's sort of the way I feel like I was set up for teachers to teachers. I made that same mistake. You know, I've taught 30 years and I have at least 5 math majors that have grown out of my classes, and which is great. So then we have to redefine. It's about valuing what they do and saying, how can you reshape it? And frankly, when you learn it, it's fun to teach. And I mean, it's harder to prepare, but dang, it's fun to teach it this way.
Well, it is, except I still don't know the answer to that truck task. I still don't know. And I know what the wrong answers are, but I don't know the right answer.
Yeah.
So
that's another part. All right, I'm going to go hunt down Paul, and then I'm going to try to actually work out a little bit today.
All right. Thank you for sending me that. That would be helpful.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. See ya. Bye, Kim.
Bye.